Hello guys, we had set up our folder and install all those dependencies that is required to make our project up and running. Also we saw how we can load in env properties. Now next I am going to create database configuration so that we can connect with our Mongo database and perform certain functionalities on it. Basically we are going to do CRUD operation on our Mongo database, and how we are going to do that we'll see that in action after some time. And then we are going to do it in very modular way and very structured way so that we can reuse the code more than once, right? The code which we are going to use, it should be reusable, right? And how you can do that? For that we need MongoDB installed in our system. Since I don't have that installed, I'm going to install that and I'll show you how we can install that in our system. Since I have already downloaded that MongoDB, what you need to do is you just need to go on MongoDB download community website. It is the official website which is referred by MongoDB, and here we can see MongoDB community server which is free for usage, right? So what we are going to do is we are just going to select the platform and then we'll click download. Since I am doing it on Windows, I'll click Windows 64 and then the package MSI. Now since I have downloaded it already, what I'll do is I'll just double click on it and it should start the installation process. Meanwhile, we'll go back to code and then we'll see what else have to be done, right? So in the previous section, as we saw that we have already configured the env, and then in this video we are going to see how we can configure the connection between MongoDB and how we are going to use that. But for that we need MongoDB to be installed. What I'm going to do is next, then I will accept the term and conditions and I will click on complete. Finally I'll click on next, install. Then the installation process should begin and it should happen quickly. Meanwhile we'll proceed with the code. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open this config folder, and then inside that folder I'm going to create one file which name is going to be in db underscore config. You can name it whatever you want, but for the simplicity and for the project structure we are going to name it as a db config so that it is readable properly, and basically we can find all the configuration related to db in this file. I'm going to create this file, and then of course first thing which we need to do is we need to just define the package under which package it comes. I'm going to use package config, and then finally what I need is I need a db client, right? For that what I can do is I will just create a variable as db client, and it should be of type mongo dot client, which is exposed by MongoDB driver package, right? And from where we will get this driver package, for that we need to install that package over here. I'll show you how we can do that, right? To install a package, we know that we can use go get command and then the package name. So for MongoDB driver we are going to use go.mongodb.org and then slash mongo hyphen driver hyphen mongo. You can take this package from MongoDB official, and then you will be having the latest version of MongoDB. I will just click enter and then installation should begin. Let's wait couple of minutes, then it should have installed successfully. Meanwhile I'll check the status of the MongoDB which we are installing here, right? You can see it's still in progress. That means it will take a bit time to install it properly. Alright, I will just minimize this and then we'll see here if this package is being downloaded successfully or not. Okay, now you can see here it has been downloaded successfully. Now what I will do is I will just create a variable which I already created with name db client, right? And then what next I'm going to do is I'm going to but I'm going to create a couple of helper function which we are going to use throughout our application. Okay, what I will do is I will create a function init database. All right, so now init database is going to return us a Mongo client that will be coming from the MongoDB package, mongo.client, and then also it will be returning error. All right, now here what we need is we need database name, right? Not database name but the database URL. So for that what we will do is I will say db URL, right? And I will use get env property from this package itself, right? Since that you can see here that particular method get env property is present on this specific package, right? Package config, so we don't need to import that. Instead we can directly put the name and use it, right? So here what I need to pass is database URL. I will just confirm once more, database URL, right? So the same key which we have defined there, we need to pass the same key over here, and then we will be having the database URL over there. Finally what I am going to do is I am going to create one context, and for that we need to use context package which is already there in Golang. Why we are going to use context package? Because it will give us access to handle the time, duration, and the cancellation. Otherwise if there's something wrong happened in our code, the code may go in a deadlock condition and it will never come back. So we have to then close our system and restart, right? Not only system but it may affect only application as well. So with what I will do here is with timeout, okay, and it needs a context. So what I'm going to do is context dot background, all right, and then I'm going to pass the time duration. So maximum time it should take is 10 seconds, right? Now from where this second is coming, it is present on the time package which is already inbuilt function in inbuilt package in Golang, right? Now this with timeout will return us two things, context and the cancellation function. For that what we are going to do is we are going to store this context and the cancel function, right, in a variable as a variable. Fine. Next thing what I'm going to do is very first thing is I'm going to use defer keyword. If you're not aware of defer keyword is a one keyword through which we can cancel certain actions once the functionality has been completed. All right, so I will use defer keyword, and then call the cancel function. That means when this function is executed successfully, this cancellation should have done, right, to cancel this context. Next what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the access of client, and then error from the Mongo package. What it will do is it will expose one method connect, and in that connect we need this context which we created above, right? We'll pass that context, and what else we need options, right? And then client dot, I need to call one method over here, apply URI, right? So what this URI will be doing, it is nothing, it is going to take this DB URL and try to connect with the MongoDB using this context. That means if I'll put here 10, then maximum time it will take as a 10 second to connect with the MongoDB, and then it will throw the error, right? So next what I'm going to do is if there's any error, right, I'm going to check for error not equals to nil. All right, if error is there means I'll just use log.fatal, and then I will simply pass the error. And if error is not there, in that case what I'm going to do is I'm just going to print a success message, and here I'm going to put database connected successfully. All right, so I need this fmt package as well. All right, and then finally I will return we need client, right? So I will return client, and then error is going to be nil in this case. All right, I will save this function, and then we need one more helper function. Using that we can get database collection as well. So for that, what I can do is get database collection, and where we are going to use that, we'll see that in action after some time. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to put db name, and it is going to be of type string, pointer string, right? And then collection name, and it is also going to be of type string, and then finally it will return a collection, mongodb collection. So it will be returning mongodb collection. Fine. First I will be checking if first I will dereference this variable, right? If I want to use this db name, I must be dereferencing it, and then I will be checking it against a value if it is empty or it is null, right? Null. In Golang we don't have the concept of null, but we have concept of nil, right? So both are same only, but here it is nil. So in that case, what we will be doing is we will assign db name, or we can say db name equals to, and default db name I'll put here as a variable, default db name. All right, and this is going to be, let's say, test db. Fine. So basically what we are going to do is we are going to connect with the mongodb, or we are going to get the collection, right? And if we are not able to find, this code is not able to find any collection, or if we are passing db name as a nil or empty string, that means there's no db, and then it will by default use the test db. Okay, so what I'll do is I will assign that as a default db name. Fine. And then finally what I'll do is I'll check once more if db client equals to nil. In that case, what we have to do is db client, we have to initialize the db client, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore the error, since already I have logged that error above, and then I'll call this init function. So what this will do is this will just initialize the client here, over here, right? And then here I need, that's fine. All right, error. Fine. Now next what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the collection. So collection is going to be coming from the db client dot database, and then we are going to pass this database name, which is coming inside this function, right? Database name, and then we have collection method over there, which will just return the collection name based on the collection name which we are passing there, right? Finally we are going to return this collection name. Why it's giving us error? Declare not used. It is used here. Let me save it. db client, right? db client, it is there and we are using it. That's fine, or else I will do X. Fine. Okay, so there's one concept here which we can apply over here, is the db name and then collection name. It will fetch those collection, and then it will give access to the specific collection. Fine. And next, finally, we are going to make one more function, which is initialize db. All right. So we'll be calling this function somewhere in the initialization, so that our db has to be initialized. Here I will put error and then init database. Alright, and if error is going to be not nil, in that case we are going to log fatal, right, and then we'll just say fail to connect to DB, right, and we can use fatal if as a formatted string, and here I'm going to put %v so that I can put error as a value there and it will get logged on the screen as well. So finally I'm going to do return db and then nil, right. This initialize db function is going to return two things. That is going to be pointer of Mongo client and then the error. Alright, finally we have one more function. I think that is not necessary. So what we did so far is we created one DB configuration file where we have couple of methods so that we can connect with the database, and then this function will be returning client of that specific database. And then we have database collection method as well, which will be using for fetching database collection. And finally we have initialize DB method, which we will use to initialize it. So what we will do here is we'll go here in func, and then again like same we did in env, right, we'll call init method to initialize the database. Here what we will do is we will force to load env variable as well. So in case if this did database config and env file, right, both runs parallelly, then we may have the issue for env variable initialization, since we are accessing the property of database URL, right. So for that we are enforcing that here as well to load the env variable properly, and if it is loaded properly then this initialize database we should call, so that database has been initialized successfully. And where we are going to call it, of course we are going to call it initialize database, right. Alright, so whenever we are going to get any database collection, that time itself it will call this init database, and then database will get initialized and we'll be getting access to those database, right. So in here what we can do one more thing over here. If we can put this inside condition, if db client not equals to nil, or if db client is going to be nil, which we did before, so I will just cut it and paste it here, right. We are going to assign initialize the database collection, right. So this declared, but it is not being used even though we are using it here, right. Now for the time being I'm going to put else as well, so db client is equals to going to be db client. Still it is saying declared and not use. Okay, we'll check this later, but for now I'm just going to remove it. Alright, now this configuration file is ready so that we can connect to our database. Meanwhile we'll see we have something to install there, right. We can see installation has been done successfully, and we should be able to connect with the MongoDB cluster, not cluster but the MongoDB Compass. This is one of the client to connect with the Mongo database, and Mongo database has already been installed locally. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on localhost. You can see I'm able to connect through it, and of course the URL is going to be localhost 27017.
So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create one database, and the name is going to be bookshop. Alright, and the collection name default I'm going to put as a taste. Fine, I will create the database, and the same I'm going to feed in env as well. So here what it is going to connect through is, here we need to give the database name. So database name is going to be what, bookshop, right? That's what we created there in MongoDB. This bookshop. Alright, we'll save it, and then we'll go back to main function. Alright, why it is giving us error? Let's fix that. Go get gin. Fine, maybe it's losing some context. Anyway, we have gin that ready in our application, so we don't need to worry about that. Now the database configuration is ready and it is initialized as well, right? Finally, what we are going to do is we are going to follow certain design pattern. So in this lecture we are going to follow the MVC, model view controller, right? Along with that we are also going to follow service and repository, so that controller will just call service method and service will connect through repository. Service will have access for all those repository methods and it can perform it actions, right? And then finally repository will be having all those CRUD operations there, and we'll design repository in such a way that we'll just pass a collection name and it will give access for that repository. That means we'll be having all those methods present for each of the collections, so we don't have to create each file for the similar kind of functionality. That is the concept of reusability, right? So first let me create that folder over here. What I'll do is I'll just create a folder with name repository, right? And then here what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one file with name mongo repository, repository, right? .go. First thing first, what I'm going to do here is name this as a repository package. Fine, and then next I'm going to start from here. So I'm going to create one type over here, which is going to not type but the struct, which is going to be mongo repository. It's going to be struct, and then here what I'm going to do is collection. It will have access to the collection, right? So based on the collection only, this file will return all those CRUD operation which we are going to implement later down below in this section. All right. And why we are going to do this? Because we can access this repository in our service file, and based on that we can perform certain operation to the MongoDB, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, this collection is going to be of type Mongo client, not client, it is going to be of type collection, right? Collection. Fine. Now we are going to register certain methods on this struct, and how we are going to do that? Of course we can do this like, we'll just pass the struct name over here, let's say Mongo repository, and then I'll pass the pointer of Mongo repository. And then here what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one function read. So what this read will do, based on the ID, it will read document from the MongoDB collection. All right. Basically, based on the ID, we are going to fetch data from the MongoDB, and it will just return one data, since I'm going to implement it for one data. So this read will return one data, and here I'm going to put session context, and it is going to be of type mongo dot session context. Why we will be using session context? Because let's say we are going to perform certain acid operation. What does acid operation means, right? Acid operation is nothing but the atomicity we are going to follow, right? In database we all have learned that concept of acid, right? It should follow the atomicity and integrity so that our data consistency is there, right? So for that we are going to use Mongo session context. That means if we want to perform certain operation inside a transaction, in that case what we need to do is we need to use MongoDB transaction, and whatever the functionality which we are going to call inside that transaction, right, it will make sure that nothing changes until everything happens successfully. So if there's some error, it will roll back to its previous state, and this way we can ensure that our data consistency is there. So for that we are going to use Mongo session context, and then what this read method will do is it will just return us interface. Why interface? Because it can be any data, since we have collection based data, so we might have different collection data and then we cannot decide what exact type is there. So later on if we are going to import use this function, at that time we'll just convert this interface to a specific struct or maybe map or something, whichever we want, right? And now it is going to return one error as well. So now next what I'm going to do is I'm going to use session context here. Session context is going to be of type, not type, but before that I will create one function which I will reuse it here, so that we don't have to do similar kind of things in each of the functionality. For that I will just write one function, set up session context, right, and here we are just going to pass session context, and it is going to be of type, of course, Mongo session context, Mongo dot session context, and then it is also going to return a Mongo session context, Mongo dot session context, right? Basically what it will do is if there's no session context, it will append a default session context. That means if there's no transaction happening or there's no session context assigned to the specific function, it will use the default session context or a new session context, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use session context equals to context dot with cancel, right? And here what I'm going to do is ctx, not ctx, but the context dot background, right? Background here, this time I'm going to use to do, all right, with cancellation. Fine. So this will give us a session context, and next what I'm going to check is if the parameter which is passed here exists or not, right? For that what I can do is I will just check if it is nil, right? So in that case I will return Mongo dot new session context, and then I will assign this context as well as Mongo session from context, and I will pass the context over here as well, right? So it will just create a new Mongo session context and it will return it. Otherwise, if we already passed the session context, it will return this session context itself. Now I can use this session context everywhere in the program. So here what we need to do is we need to just pass this session context, and then it will be working fine. What happens here is multiple value, okay, with cancel return multiple values. So here we need to, I'm going to remove this var, and then I'm going to use cancel over, since this will return cancel as well. So what I'm going to do is defer cancel. So later on it will call the cancel function and it should be working fine. Why it is giving error still? Context and the cancellation function, right? So context and the cancel function, fine, that is fine. Context dot background, let's use background. All right, so now this should be working fine. And then why it is giving error? No new variable on the left side, right? So alright guys, we were using with cancel, but it should be with timeout, and then it will return us two variable. That is, one is going to be a session context, context, and then other one is going to be cancel function. So we can use defer cancel so that it can be cancelled later once this program has been function has been executed successfully. Now next we can assign those context over here in this function, and we'll get a context. If it does not exist, we'll get a new context from the MongoDB. And next what I'm going to do here is I'm going to call mongo repository dot collection, right? So now this collection, I'm going to use this collection, and then I'm going to use find one, right? So this find one will fetch one object from the database based on the ID which we are going to pass from here. So here what we will pass is, we'll pass the session context, alright, and then we are going to pass one object condition, right? That is, you can call it as a filter. So this is going to be of type bson.m. That means it is going to return one map object, and we can directly use it like this. So underscore id is of course going to be the object id. We cannot pass the id directly, we need to convert this id into object id. And how we are going to do that? We can say object id, right? And then here what we can do is we can use primitive package, right? That is present in Golang, and using primitive package we can convert this object id, string id, into object id. So you can see here we have function object id from hex is nothing but a string, and then we'll pass this id over here. This will return us two things. One is going to be object id, and then other one is going to be error. So error, I'm going to skip it from here, we don't need error here. If you want to play with error or you want to return custom error, you're free to do that, you can play with that. So here what I'm going to do is I'm just going to assign the object id, but before that what I can do is, let's handle the error as well. So in case if there's any error, it should actually return some error, right? So if error is going to be nil, not nil, in that case I'm going to return nil, because there won't be any data, right? And then second parameter I'm going to return this error itself. Alright, now this find one will return us Mongo result, and what we are going to do here is we are going to store that in a result variable. Alright, and then what we are going to do, that we are going to convert those Mongo result into a map of a string and interface. How we can do that? Let's see. What we'll do is we'll create a document, and then we'll create it as a type of map of a string and interface. Alright, and then we'll just check if error is not going to be nil. How we are going to do that? We'll just call this decode function. What this decode function will actually do here is it will just decode your result which is fetched from the database, and it will decode, that means it will convert that result into your document which you are passing it here. So here I'm going to just pass the address of the document, and then finally I'm going to check error not equals to nil, right? If this is not nil, that means error is there. In that case we are going to return nil and then error, right? Finally, if error is not there, we are just going to return the actual document, and then error is going to be nil, right? We'll save it. Now we have created the read functionality. It will just return us one data. Instead of read, we can rename it as find one. That will be much better. And then we are going to create one more functionality, that is create. So what I will do is I will copy this method signature and paste it here, and instead of find one I will put the method name as a create, and in create we need the data to be saved here, right? For that it is going to be of type interface because we don't know which kind of data is coming there. So here it is going to be of any data, any collection. On any collection, if we are going to call this functionality create, so the data might be different based on the collection. Here we can say data, all right, and then the same thing, we need a session context over here, right? So here what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call again that function, and then I'm going to pass the session ctx that is coming inside a parameter, right? Finally what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call the Mongo, not Mongo but Mongo repository dot collection dot, and this collection is having a lot of functionalities, right? So I will just call insert one, since we are going to insert only one data, and then I'll pass the data. Not data, first it is going to take context, so I will pass session context and then the data, right? If any error is there, we need to check for error. If error is there, if error not equals to nil, I will just return nil, not nil, but here I will return, okay, so insert one is going to return what? It is going to return the Mongo insert one result. So instead we can say result, right? And then even we don't need that, so we'll just return the result and then the error itself, right? That's fine. We'll save it, and then we have create functionality and find one, right? We are going to create a couple of more functionalities. mr, I will just copy this and paste it here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this method signature from here, I'm going to paste it here. Alright, I'll name this as a update, and then data which we are going to update. Before that we need ID as well, so that we can update a specific document, right? And then the session context, right? The same thing which we are going to do here is we are going to get the session context, right? Actually this should not be setup session context, it should be named as get session context, which is more suitable. Fine. Now next here, right? Here what we are going to do is we have session context over there. Finally we are going to convert object ID, and then this time I'm going to skip error, since that is not compulsory to handle it here. If there's any error, of course this update won't be successful, then in that case there will be nothing happening inside the database, no changes will be there in the database. Now I will use the same function object ID from hex, and then I'll pass the ID. Then I will call again collection dot update one method, and this also needs session context as well, filter, and then the update object. So we need to give filter first, so I'm going to assign bson.map. Bson is nothing but type present on MongoDB, right? And then here what I'm going to do is I'm going to give underscore ID, and then here I'm going to pass object ID. So this is going to be filtered, and then finally we are going to provide the data which we are going to update for the specific document. All right, then this update function will return us something, of course, right? What I'm going to do is I'm just going to skip that, and the error will also be there. So if there's any error, I'm going to return error, or else I'm not going to return anything. In that scenario, what I'm going to do is I will just call return, or we can say here result. So we are going to return result as well as error. I'll save it, and then I'm going to create one more function down below, that is going to be delete, right? So delete, we just need ID since we are not going to update anything in the database. So I will remove the data from here, and then it is also going to be return some data or the error. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use delete one functionality, and then data should not be there, result and the error. Fine. We are almost done with the CRUD operation, create, update, read, delete, and then we'll create two more functionality over here, so that we'll have all those methods present in the repository and we can perform action based out of that. So right, so here again I'm going to take Mongo repository, all right, and then I will use find all method over here, right? It will just accept filter, and again it is going to be of type interface, right? And what else we need here? We need session context, of course, right? And this is going to return map of, sorry, not map but array of map of a string, and then any, or we can say interface. Since we are not sure about what type we are going to use, so we can use interface here, and then we are going to return error in other case, right? So let's implement this method. Very first thing is we are going to use session context here, and session context, and we are going to get that from our method, which is get session context. We'll pass the context from here, all right, and then what we'll do is we'll do mongo repository dot collection dot find, right? And in this find we'll pass session context, filter, and if any options are there, right? I'm not going to use options as of now. You can, if you want, you can use it and see what are options there, but for the simplicity I'm just going to use filter as well as session context, all right? So this is going to return me two things, of course. One is going to be cursor means it is going to be return the row, right? And then also it is going to be return error. So now of course we need to check if error is there. If error not equals to nil, in that case I'm going to return nil and then the error. I just need to put return statement here, fine. And if error is not there, we obviously need to defer cursor to be closed, right? So once the functionality has been completed, of course we need to close the cursor so that it won't leak the memory, or you can say it won't keep running in the background. So next thing what I'm going to do is variable result. Since we are going to return array of results, right? It is going to be of type map and string of interface, right? Next what I'm going to do is I'm going to just iterate over the cursor. That is going to be nothing but the row. What it will do is it will check for the row. Context is going to be our session context, all right? And then finally we are going to extract out the document from the row, and type of the document is going to be of course interface, all right? And then I'm going to check if error not equals to, so for that what I will do is I will just go here and then I will copy this, since it is going to be same, so why should we write once more? I will copy it and paste it here, and here what it will do is it will try to decode. And how it will try to decode? It will try use cursor dot decode, because this time we'll will have access to each of the cursor, right? So cursor.decode, it will decode all those property which is fetched from database, and it will map those property to this document. All right, and if it's error there, it will return error. Finally, what we can do is we can just append those results. If you're not aware of what append is one function that is used to append a new element inside a slice, right? So here what I'm going to put is document. All right, now finally outside this for loop, I'm going to return results and then cursor dot error. All right, let me save this, and then finally one more function we are going to create here is, which is very important, which is giving us more flexible way to query data from the MongoDB, and that is called aggregate. So aggregate is one of the functionality in MongoDB which is highly flexible. So based on the aggregation, we can take out all those data which is present in inside different collection, and then we can fetch those data. Joining those we can join those collection, fetch out the data, and then perform some modification on it. So this is how this work is. Basically, this work is stage by stage. In one stage, it will collect all those data from different collection, and then in the next stage, it is going to perform some different operation. It is going to filter some data, it is going to modify some data. So this is how aggregation works in MongoDB. So that we are going to implement here is, what I will do here is I will just copy this method signature and then paste it here, and then I will name this function as aggregate. So two things here we need, of course, which is going to be pipelines, and then it is going to be of type mongo.pipeline. All right, and then session context. Mongo.session context, right? And then finally we have to return some data out of this. So data is going to be of string and then interface. If there's no data, there might be error, so we need to error as well. Same thing we are going to do here is we are going to get session context. How we are going to do is we are going to use a function get session context, right? And in that we are going to pass ctx, which will be coming in parameter, and then here as well we are going to do the same thing which we did for find all. So here I will just copy it and paste it, but here will be one difference. I will use aggregate and this need context pipeline, right? So session context already I passed, but here we need pipelines, right? Now this is done. I will save it, and finally we have all those methods present over here, right, to perform CRUD operation on MongoDB or collection, right? So we'll just see what we have created over here. We have created create, find one, update, delete, find all, and aggregate, right? Now the function, all the function is ready. We just need to expose this, and how we are going to do this, we are going to say func and then get Mongo repository, right? Get Mongo repository, and what does it need is it needs two things. First thing is going to be, of course, database name, or you can say DB name, and it is going to be of type, you can say MongoDB. No, I just need a collection name, right? Collection name, and then it's going to be of type string. So what it will do is it will first fetch for the collection. So remember we created the get database collection functionality over here. When we created this database configuration file, you can see get database collection, right? So here we just need to provide two parameter. One is going to be database name and other one is going to be collection name. So we are going to use the similar functionality, same functionality over there. For that I'm going to use get database collection, but that is present inside different package, right? For that we need to import config package, then get database. I'm going to, it's not giving me suggestion, so let me just copy this from here and I'll paste it here. All right, so here we need two things. Of course, database name should also be there. It's going to be of type string, and then here I'm going to pass and db name, and then second parameter, of course, collection name. So after this we'll be having the access of the collection if it is present there, and then for this repository struct, Mongo repository struct, we just need collection, right? So what we are going to do here is we are just going to return an address of the MongoDB, not MongoDB, but the Mongo repository was named there, Mongo repository, right? Mongo repository, and it needs collection only, right? So we are just going to assign collection over there. Why it's giving error? Okay, this function is returning the Mongo repository. But before that, there's one concept we need to apply here is, since this is the implementation of the CRUD operation in Mongo repository, right? But as we are going to create our program much flexible, we need to hide the implementation of this functionality, and for hiding that implementation we'll use the concept of abstraction, right? How we are going to use abstraction? In Golang we have the concept of interface, right? So we are just going to use interface to abstract all this implementation. Instead of depending on this actual implementation, what we are going to do is we are just going to create one interface. So every time we will be calling those interface method, and this internally this abstract this implemented method will get called. And how it will happen, let's see that in action. So before this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create one abstract method. And how we can do that, I will type Mongo. Why I put I here is I'm just marking it as interface. So just for remembering purpose I put I, and I'm following the capital case here, Mongo repository, and it's going to be of type interface this time, right? Now this interface should have all these method signature. That is compulsory. This is the concept of abstraction and creating a interface. So all those method, basically what does it mean is, let me define it properly. So first thing what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put all those method signature over here. Find one, and then I'll put update. I'll put delete, and then I'll put find all, and then finally I'll put aggregate. So what does it mean? Basically we are going to say we are not going to depend on any one of these implementation. We don't care about implementation. Instead we are going to depend on this interface function. We are going to call this interface function, and as per Golang, any struct which is going to implement all the function of this particular interface, then it is set to satisfy that particular interface. And if that is satisfying that particular interface, that means it is implementing all those methods, and then it will act as a proxy. That means it will hide those implementation, and it will just we can just use that interface to call that implemented method directly on that specific struct. So this is the concept of abstraction. We are going to abstract this raw implementation and we are going to use this method signature to call this. Basically we are going to call this interface method instead of the implementation, right? This is how we can make our code much more modular, much more flexible, and if we want to change it later, we can change it easily. So now let's see that instead of here what I'm going to return is I'm going to return Mongo repository, right? Since I'm going to return Mongo repository has all this method and this method has been implemented on Mongo repository, right? So what we are getting error here is cannot use Mongo repository as value in return. Mongo does not implement. Mongo repository is pointer to interface, not interface. So basically it is saying it is pointing to interface, not the actual interface. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to delete all this pointer, right? And I'm going to save it now. Let's see how it works. So still it's saying Mongo repository does not implement, it's pointer to interface, not interface. So what error exactly we are getting? Okay, so this is fine. I just need to remove this, right? Now this method is returning the interface, right? It is not returning the actual implementation, even though we are going to return this from here. Later on, if we want to change this implementation, this time, for example, let's say this value, we have written all this functionality that is fetching data or performing any CRUD operation on the actual database object, right? But let's say we'll just change it with some other implementation, any implementation which we have created with other data source, then the data will come from here and we don't have to change all these functionalities, right? Because we are going to call this function everywhere in our program and we don't have to change that everywhere. This is the beauty of interface in Golang. So I'll save it, and finally we have a Mongo repository ready in place. And what I will do is I will just create one more file over here, and while we are going to create that file, we'll see that in later. So let me create one more file over here with the name, let's say repository.go. It is going to contain all those repositories which we are going to make. Let's say we are going to make a user model. So for a user model, we are going to create one repository. For another model, let's say for book model, we are going to create repository. So we'll find a way, we'll create in such a way that we can centralize all those here in a repository, so that when we are going to access this file, we have all those repository in one place and we can use anywhere in our program. How we are going to do that? Let's see. So I'll just do package repository, and here I'm going to make one struct with name repository, right? It's going to be of type struct, right? And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to give user repository, right? And it is of course going to return Mongo repository, right? So then I'll create one more function over here, and what it will do is using that function, let's say get repository, right? Get repository, right? So now here what I'm going to return all those repositories which I'm going to mention over here. So in this case, let's say return, and I'm going to return the address of actual repository. Finally, we are going to return repository, and then inside this we need user repository, right? From where we are going to get user repositories, of course we are going to use get Mongo repository functionality, and we just need to pass a Mongo database name as well as collection name, right? So for user we are going to use config package and then get database. We are not getting any suggestion here. There's something wrong with my VS Code. I'll just copy this from here, not to get database collection, but env. I need this property, right? Get env property. All right. So here what we need is database name as well as service provider. We don't have key related to database name. So what I'll do is I'll put database underscore name, and then it's going to be of type string. Then we just need to do here as well, initialize that database name, and I'm going to put database underscore name. Right now I should be access to this database name. Here I'm going to use MongoDB name, let's say. So I'm going to put the same name over here, and then finally I'll go back to env configuration. I will put database MongoDB name, right? I will copy this key and paste it over here, and name, right? Now I'll go back to repository, and here what I'll do is I'll get env property, and here I'll pass database name, right? And then I need to pass one more thing over here, which is going to be of collection. So here what I'm going to do is, since it is user, so I'm going to name this as a user collection. I'll save it. Finally I have a method get repository which will return the repository, and all those model which we are going to create here is for each of those model we need to have a repository so that we can perform certain operation on that, right? That's why we are going to mention all those repository here, and they all are going to return Mongo repository, of course, right? And then it will have all those functionality ready in that, right? This is how we are going to make our code reusable, and this is how we are going to make our code more robust and flexible. So next what we are going to do is we are going to create one more folder over here, and here I'm going to call it as a model, right? And in this I'm going to create one user model. So user.go, right? How we can create a model? Then of course first we are going to link it with a package, and then it is going to be of type struct, and I'll call it as a user. So very first thing it will have is ID. This is how we are going to use. So ID, and then it's of course going to be of type primitive dot object ID. All right, object ID, fine. Now when it is going to be saved, it is going to save like this. So here we should have a, not like this, but I'm doing something wrong here. All right, we can use backtick over here, and then we can say bson. So bson is nothing but when we are going to save this specific data in the MongoDB, right, it is going to be saved in the same name what we are going to define here. So I'm going to define here ID, and if there's no ID, that means a new object will be created, and we are completely going to omit this. And if we are not going to omit it, then it will always require an ID before saving it. So for each of the model, then we have to assign a new ID, and then we have to save that. That is additional one extra step, right, which we are not going to do. So if there's no ID, means new ID will be created, it will omit the ID by default. And then finally when we are going to fetch this collection, right, so we want the data in the JSON format. So how it is going to map this in the same way, if it is not there, means if it is going to be empty, right? So this is how we are going to define all the fields in our user object. And what I'll do, I'll just copy paste all these, and we, of course, we don't need object ID here. For the simplicity, what I'm going to do is it is going to be of type string. It's also going to be of type string. What I'll do here is I'll just put name, and then email, and then password. I'm not going to use more field over here. Maybe I'm going to use created. That is also not necessary. We'll use that later. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rename it as a name, and then this is going to be renamed as email, and then we are going to rename it as a password. All right. So here name is necessary, so I'm going to omit empty. Email is also necessary, so I'm going to remove email as well, not to be empty, right? Password should also not to be empty. So this is how we are going to define our struct, right? And we'll see lot of concept further in the video, like how we can put index, how we can make it unique. That all we are going to see later in the video. So for now, we are just going to create a simple user, and then we are going to create one more folder over here, new folder. Let's say I'm going to name it as a service, right? And then we'll be having user service dot go, right? Here also we are going to use the same. We are going to link this package and then type, but here I'm going to abstract it once more. The service has to be abstracted, right? So what I'm going to do here, why we are going to abstract it more, because later if we want to test it also, we can test it just by changing its source, right? So it is going to be of user service. I'm just renaming it as per what I want, but if you want to rename it something else, you are free to rename it something else, but make sure you are following the convention. Like if someone is going to read this code, they should be able to read this code properly. There should not be any code which they are going to read and they are not going to understand it, right? Let's say if we are going to write something else and the functionality which is going to happen or executed is something else, what does that mean, right? So for that, I'm going to follow interface over here, and then here also what I will do is I will just write a create method over here, and then here we just need a context. Why I'm going to take context over here? This is going to be a gin context. And how we can do that? We can do that like this. And then the data as well. So data, if we need, do we need data over here? No, we don't need. So even context is enough for this function, right? So we just need context. Shall we proceed in this way? I think no. Why? Because it then depends strictly on the session context. Then we won't be able to reuse this user service in some other service, right? So for that, let it be very simple, and it just need a data and it will work. So create, I will put the name as create user, I'll put data, and then session context if it is being used somewhere in other service or controller, right? From there, if we want to pass this data, so we can do that as well. So I will just do session context, and it's going to be of type mongo dot session context. All right, session context. So next, finally, what it is going to return is, of course, it is going to return interface, and then the error, right? We are not going to implement it here, but we are just going to give the method signature over here. Next, what we are going to do is we are going to create user struct over here, and we can call it a user service, right? And then we are going to register this method over here. And how we can do that? We are just going to say func and then the struct name, which is user service, of course, and then user service, I will say user service, and any struct which is going to implement, which is going to have all this method, register all this method present inside that interface, is set to satisfy that interface. We know that, right? So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to, okay, so this user service need repository, right? And this repository is going to be of type imongo repository. From where we are going to take it? Of course, we are going to take it from Mongo, not Mongo, but the repository. So we can call this repository. So right here, what we can do, one thing is, if the package name is going to be same as the variable name, right? So we can put some alias name there. We are going to put like this. Now this package will get imported, even though the package name is repository, but it will be imported with alias name repo. Now I am going to use it with name repo dot mongo repository. Alright. Here what I am going to do is, since we have the access of repository here, so what I will do is us dot, then I will just call repository, and finally I will be having access to all those method which is present there on repository, right? That's cool. So us dot, then I have repository over there, repository, and then we'll just call create, and it needs data as well as session context. That is how we are going to do it, right? It's very easy, and we are following certain design pattern so that we don't have to write code again and again, right? So here what I'm going to do is, it is going to return interface and then error. I'm going to just return it, right? In this case, it will just do its functionality and return it from here. So finally we have this functionality wrapper. And of course, there's one question here, why we are going to use this much of layer. So the answer is, if let's say this create user has to do a lot of functionality, let's say before creating user it has to put some other data in other collection, or it is going to perform certain operation or functionality, and then it is going to save data, then where we are going to put all those logic, right? That logic is nothing but it is reusable logic. So of course it is not going to be there in the repository. Why? Because repository should be as per naming convention, right? Repository should be always be doing a single functionality, even if we'll talk about solid principle as well. So what does it say? It should, any file should have a single responsibility, right? Any functionality should have a single responsibility. It should not mug up. So all the repository should have all the method which is going to connect with the database and then fetch the data from the database, right? So that's why we are not going to make our repository dirty. So if there has to be some code, logical functionality to be executed, that all we are going to write inside this service method, right? That's why we create a service layer as well. So finally, what we will do is, as of now we are just going to create the user, so we'll just save it, and then finally we have service, repository, everything in place, right? We need a controller from where we'll be passing those data to this service. Whatever the required data need to be there. So what I will do is, I will just create one more folder over here, and I will call it controller, right? And then inside controller I will create one file. Let's say use this time user underscore controller. We may have n number of controller, n number of service, and of course n number of repository as well as n number of model as well, right? So this is the way we are going to follow the code structure, we are going to maintain everything properly and in a very modular and clean way. So what I'll do here is I will just put user controller.go function, and this controller function is not going to be abstracted anymore. It is going to be simple, straightforward, since we don't have to do any kind of functionality here, right? We'll just extract the data from the gin. If I'm going to use, we are going to use gin, or else if we are going to use other framework like eco or fiber, then of course that data has to be come from those framework, right? So I'll just click package controller, and then I'm going to write a simple functionality over here like create user. So this is going to be a controller function. That's why not controller, but you can call it as a handler function as well. What does that mean? Handler function is nothing but a function which can be used as a middleware in gin, right? We'll see that middleware function. We talked a lot of time about middleware function, right? But we don't have clear idea on what is middleware function. Slowly we'll come on middleware function as well, which is very interesting, and all those authentication functionality or manipulation of header will perform that on the middleware layer. We'll see that action in the next video. So for now we are going to use, of course, the pointer of gin context, and then here we will be having, if we are going to create user, right? So of course the data should be coming inside the API through body, or you can say the form data, right? I'm assuming the data is coming in the form of raw data, raw JSON data. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to create one variable over here, right? And here what I'm going to do is, one thing you can do here is you can directly use this model itself here, but you can create your own DTO as well. So let's say you don't want to accept ID here, so in DTO you can omit this ID and you just define only these three properties. So you will be getting only this property, and that ID will be excluded from that specific data. That is the proper way of taking data from the API. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just create a duplicate of this, and I'm going to name it as a user, let's say user create DTO, right? So here what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete this. I just need name, email and password, right? What I'm going to do here is I just need that DTO over here. I will name a variable as a DTO, and it is going to be of type, of course it is present in model, and then it is going to be create. Still I'm not getting any suggestion. Oh, it's coming too late, right? So fine. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to check for error, and how this error will be coming. I'm going to execute ctx dot should bind JSON. There's one functionality in gin, should bind JSON. What it will do is it will accept one parameter as an object, which is going to be the address of your variable, and whatever data is coming in the API, right, in the request object, it will convert those data, or it will just map those data to your DTO variable or any variable which you have provided there. So that's the concept of should bind JSON. What I'll do is I'll just pass the address of DTO, and then if error not equals to nil, right, that means there's some error with the data which we are expecting. It is not as per expectation. In that case, what we are going to return is we are going to return, let's say gin.h, not h, but we have function ctx.json over there, and here we can say 400, and then finally we are going to put the error object over there. How we can do that? We are going to use gin.h, and then right? And then here in message I can say bad request, right? Bad request, and status code is going to be 400, right? And then error should also be there, right? So error, I'm going to say error dot error, which will return the message. Now, okay, I should not return this since it's a controller function. Now here I'll put return. Next, if there's no error, that means we will get all those data which is coming inside the body as a raw JSON data. And then finally what we will do is we will just call service. But how we will call the service, right? For that, again, we need our controller to be of type struct. So I will put controller and then struct. This is going to hold user service, and where that user service exists, that is going to exist in service dot user I user service. It's taking a lot of time to give me suggestion. It might be issue with the VS Code, but for you it should be coming as early as possible. So I user service, now we have the user service access over here, right? So what we can do is, okay, this method has to be registered on user controller. For that, what we are going to do is we are going to say user controller and then the user controller, right? This time we are not going to make it abstract. We don't need to make it abstract because it doesn't need to be changed. It is just taking out the data and providing those data to the service. So service layer and repository layer basically need to be abstracted, or you can say the implementation should be hidden, so that it should be very easy to test it. Now finally what I will do here is I will just, since I have access of service, so I will just call user service dot create user, right? Here what I will pass is I will just pass this DTO, and then we don't have session context over here, so I'll pass nil. Once that is done means I will just get the data back, and then I will get the error as well, right? So if there is any error, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to check for the error. All right, if there's any error, now we can say this. I'm not going to return any error. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say it to the gin context. Okay, I am having error, you need to handle it. All right, ctx.error. And why we are going to do this? Because if we are going to write return error from here, from each of the functionality, then for each of the functionality we have to write, let's say we have thousands of functions, we have to write thousands of custom error, right? That is not the good way of handling error. Instead, what we will do is we'll just pass all those error to this gin context, and then we'll intercept those gin context at single places, right? Because this gin context, when we are going to return response, it can be intercepted, and if we can intercept that context, we can handle all those error at a single place without writing 1,000 line of codes, right? That's cool. So here we are going to assign that error, not actually error, it should be error. Why? Because the name of the error, it is going to take error interface. So what I'm going to do is, instead of errors, I'm just going to call this error, and this error will get assigned to the context. And finally we are going to return it so that next execution won't happen. Okay, it should also be error. And then if there's any data, then finally what we are going to do is I'm going to call, okay, for response, success response as well, why we need to call 100 line of code, right? For 10, if let's say 1,000 functionality is there, why we need to write 1,000 functionality? Instead, we'll just create a single response service. And how we can do that, right? So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one more folder over here, utils, right? And in that utils, I'm going to create one file with name response underscore service dot go, right? First, I will name this as a utils package, and then I will define a struct of type response service. It is going to be of type struct, and then we will be having error interface, right? And are we going to use this for error? Of course no, we are going to handle this at single places. So let's say we will be having data. So what kind of data it will hold? Interface, right? And then finally we are going to register one function on this, and it is going to be response service. We are just going to register one success functionality on this response service. So what this success response, it will accept context, and this is of course going to be of gin context, and then status code, right? And finally we will be providing the data. It is going to be of type interface. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one final response, and it is going to be of type map of a string, and then I can say any. Here I'm going to put data, and then data is going to be of type date. Data is going to be a data value, and then here I'm going to pass status code as well. So status code is going to be status code, and then finally I'm going to return some message if it is there. So here what I'm going to do is, okay, if some message has to be there, that we can also accept as a message, right? It can be of type string. So by default what I'm going to do here is assign message. Fine. So if message is not there, means it will just go empty. For that, what I can do here is I will just check if message is going to be empty. I'm going to assign final response of message equals to success, let's say, right? I'll save it, and then what I'll do here is ctx.json. I'm going to return the JSON from here, and I'll put a status code as well as the final response. I'll save it and go back to user controller. So here, along with the user service, I need response service as well, right? Response service I can say, and from where it is going to come, utils dot response service. Response service. Fine. So now I can say I will just call that, I can say response service uc.responseservice.success. I'm going to pass context, and then I'm going to pass 200, and data is going to be of type data. Here I am going to pass the empty string, or just I'm going to say successfully saved. Fine. Now let me save it. We are done, but we need one more function over here, that is func get, I will call it get user controller. And what we need here is we need two things over here, that is user service and response service. So what I'll call here is user service, and it is going to be, of course, it is going to be of type service dot user service, and then we need response service as well, right? So then response service is going to be of type utils dot response service, and finally I'm going to return the address of user controller, right? And here I should mention user controller, and it is going to return a pointer. Now here I'm going to initialize the user service, what I'm going to receive in the parameter, and then response service as well, right? I'll save it. Now we are almost done with everything except routes. So basically we have created repository which will talk with the database, it will do its operation, create, read, update and delete, and then there's a wrapper of repository which we call it as a service, where all the logical thing has to be done, and then finally from where data will be coming to service. Of course the data will be coming to service either from the different service or from the controller. So controller will be just responsible for taking all the data from the API and passing it over to the service, so that next functionality should happen either logically or it should go on the repository for the next CRUD operation. This is how we are going to design our API, and this is how we are going to make our code more modular, and data should flow in a specific direction, right? So now finally we have to create a route so that when we are going to trigger API request, it should land on a specific route. Of course, it will land on our application on a specific port, but then from that port where it has to go, in which functionality should be responsible to handle those requests, right? For that we are going to create route, and we are going to map those route with our exact controller functionality, and then of course service and repository will get called. How we are going to do that? Let's see that. So we are going to create one more folder over here. I'll name it as routes. Okay. And very first thing what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's say, create a user route. User routes.go, right? Very first thing, after creating file, we need to define a package name over there. I'm going to create routes, all right, and then I'm going to create one function, register, I can say user routes, right? It will just take the router object from the gin, so I'm going to put gin.router group, all right. So what this router group will do, it will just group all those routes, like let's say we have 100 of routes, and then it will group all those routes based on the specific needs. So we'll see that here. What I'm going to do is, since we are going to use map user controller, right, to the specific route, for that creating user controller, what we need two things. We can just go over there and we'll see. For creating user controller, we need user service as well as response service, right? So this way we are going to achieve dependency injection as well. Got it, right? Dependency injection is nothing but it's a concept in computer science, it's a concept in software development, where we are not going to depend on any of the functionality very strictly. That means to say we are not going to instantiate, or we are not going to create any required object in the struct, or you can say in that file itself. Instead, we'll make our functionality that much modular, where we can inject the required data from anywhere we are going to use it. That is the concept of dependency injection, and this make our code much more modular. So what we are going to do here is we are going to pass user service and then response service. So I'll go back to route, and then we need user service here. How we can get user service? So we can just say service dot get, not get. Do we have that method over there? No, we don't have. So we just need to go there in user service and then here also we need to write that method. What I'll do is get user service, and this method also need repository, right? So for that I'm not going to inject repository here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to call that repository directly inside this user service. Even if we are going to use that in this way, later on if we want to inject repository, we can inject repository as well, since we know the concept of dependency injection here, right? So what I'm going to do is this will return actually the interface user service. We don't need to rely on the implementation. Instead we are going to use interface method, right? Since this implementation can be changed later. So we are going to use return user service, and here it need to have repository, right? So what I will do is repo dot repo, okay, all right, repo dot not get Mongo repository, we need user repository this time, right? Repository dot get repository, repo dot get repository dot user repository. That's completely fine, and it is of type Mongo repository, right? But then why it is giving us error? User service does not implement user service to, all right. So we just need to remove it, and then it should be working fine. All right. So finally I will go in routes here, and then, or else we can do one thing over here. We'll inject repository as well from outside the route. So how we are going to do that? Repository, right? Repository, and then we need user repository. How we can do that? Repo dot, of course iMongo repository it needs, so we are just going to provide that repository from here. Fine. Now we'll go there in routes so that we can get user service. First we can get repository. How we will get that? We can say user repository, and it is going to get imported from repository dot get repository, right, and dot user repository. And then finally we are going to use user service over here. Get user service, it need repository. I'm going to just give, okay, it doesn't need to have user repository, instead it just need a repository. So we can say repository, and then here we can import it with name repo. So get repository will give all those repository, and then we'll pass the same repository over here. So this is not going to be repository, this is going to be repo alias name. And then get user service need what? It needs, what does it needs? Get user service, it needs Mongo repository, right? So anyway we have provided it with Mongo repository only. Okay, it is giving me the access of repository only. So what we need to do is we need to go inside repository. All right, so here we just need to pass user repository, I believe. Yeah, that's fine. Now next what I'm going to do is I am just going to use this router object over here, right? And then router, I can call post functionality on this, right? This router is having one post. What does this post mean? Post means nothing. This is a request method. So anyone who is going to trigger the post request, post API, that is going, if request is coming on the same path, and this method matches, that means it is going to call the specific controller function. So post is nothing but whenever we are going to pass some data to the API, or you can say we want to create some data inside the database, then of course at the end we are going to pass some data to the API. We are going to use post function, post method you can say, and then there's a couple of HTTP method which we are going to talk about that in the later section, but as of now I'm going to use post, so we'll talk on that in detail in later videos. So I'm going to define a path over here, and I can say add user, right? So here what I'm going to put is, let me just align it properly so that it will be easy for me later to add middleware function as well, right? So now we have user service as well, we just need user controller so that we can map those controller method and perform the action accordingly. For that what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the controller package and then get user controller, right? What does it need is user service and then not repository but the response service. So user service I'll pass over here, and response service also we can get like this, response service, and it has to be implemented or not service, it has to be imported from utils package. So we'll go just in response service, we have not exported those functionality yet, we have not exposed that functionality. So what we will do is we'll just create one user get response service, and then in that I'm going to say I'm going to return response service, of course, right? So return, do we need this response service over here? Response service, then we will be having success on those, right? So okay, we are just going to say response service. Why it's giving me error? Response value in okay. We need pointer over there so that we can return the address of this particular struct. So finally we are going here, and then we can say get response service, and then we'll pass those response service over here, right? Now we'll be having access of user controller. What we can do is we can just say user controller dot create user. So this is how we are going to link or map user controller with the specific routes, right? We are not over yet. We are almost completed. One last thing which we need to do is we are going to create one more route, that is going to be main route file. So in that what we are going to do is we are going to create, first thing first, we just need to name this as routes, and then we will call register routes functionality. Here we need gin.engine, right? So that we will have access of lot of modules, or you can say package inside the gin library, gin library you can say, or gin package. So here what I'm going to access is I need router, right? So what I will do is I will use this engine to group all the API, and I will put slash, and then we'll do router dot, okay, that error handling will do later, but for now what I'm going to do is I'm going to define user routes. How I'm going to define it, let's see. User route, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do router dot, again I'm going to group it, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put users. All right. Then finally we have to put one object over here, and here we are going to call those register route function. So you can see for user already we have created register user route, so we'll call this function and we'll pass a router group to that function, right? Since we have that access over here, we'll just pass this user route over there. Okay, now we are done with everything, and finally we have main function where what we are going to do is we are going to register those routes. But for that we need routes package over here, and then we'll say register routes. Here what we are going to do is we are going to just pass gin engine, and what is that? That is nothing but the app itself. So what we did so far is we created repository, Mongo repository, which is implementation of iMongo repository. That is an interface. We are not going to use implemented method directly. Instead, we are going to call the interface so that it is going to be very flexible. Later point of time, if we want to change it, we can change it easily, and it is more testable code, right? So we'll just plug it is kind of plug and play, right? So if we want to change data source as well, we'll just put out the plug and we'll put it inside some other data source. So data will be then coming from those data source. So this is how we are going to create repository, and finally what we did is we are going to import all those repositories based on the collection over here. We are going to not import, but we are going to make all those repositories based on the collection here, and then we are exposing a single repository so that it will have access of all the model CRUD operations, right? Now then we finally move over to service, and we have created all the service functions, and the service is dependent on repository, which we are providing it here, and then of course we make it as a dependency injection so that we can inject repository outside of the service, and this service will work accordingly. Then finally we created a controller where we can accept all those request data, and then we can response back using the response gin response, right? So we'll have a gin context. We just need to define a handler function, right? And we are just registering that handler function on user controller, and this user controller needs user service as well as a response service to perform certain operations, right? So based on the logic, we just took out the data using gin context should bind JSON functionality, and then we pass those data to the response service, right? This is what we did, and then finally we have the user controller in our hand. Then we created route, and where we mapped our functionality to the specific route. And how we are going to do that, we already saw that how we are going to create instance of each of this struct, right? So now finally we created a single centralized route where we are going to import all those routes which we are going to create. For example, we created user route. Next we are going to create, let's say, book route, and again we are going to create some other route. That all has to be imported on this user route so that we can register that on a single user group, router group, and then finally we are going to register this whole route into a single application. That is the gin application. So we'll import that single file over here, and then we'll register that on application. Instead of this, instead of centralizing this, we can import that separately as well, but then it won't look much good since all the route has to be handled in a specific route file, right? That is what we are following across this application, throughout this application, right? We are following very clean code, very clean architecture, so that if we want to change anything later in the program, we will be able to change it very easily. This is how an enterprise architecture is designed. And as it is just you can say it is just practice which you have to follow whenever you are working on some application, you are working on your application in company. You have to follow certain principles, you have to follow certain rule, you have to follow certain design pattern, right? So that you can create a very modular, highly flexible, highly scalable, and it is going to be a very good application, right? So that's what we learn across this Golang course. Next, we are going to learn middleware function. We are going to learn error handling, and we are going to centralize all those error processing, right? That is for this video. I hope you understand all the concept of controller service and how we are going to create API, how we are going to map those API path with the respective controller function, how it is going to invoke, right? Even though I have not tested this API as of now, but we'll test this in upcoming videos. Thank you guys. If you have any doubt, you can put down your doubt in the comment section, or you can reach out to me through my mail address. I will try to answer